Guys, just before we get started, if you're loving the podcast, can you please go leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, and please make sure that you subscribe on whatever channel that you listen to us on. It helps us out dramatically. One piece of advice for your younger self.
Nothing. Wouldn't change anything. If people are in a position, not to say this is me, in a position where you might want to learn from something they have to say, then everything they did to get to that position was useful, whether good or bad. There's no such thing as a negative side effect. It's all just effect. I wouldn't change anything. Nothing.
Welcome to the podcast, brother.
Thanks, man. Good to be back.
I was just saying that someone... It was actually not too long ago. It was weird, but it was because I didn't, obviously that they would have had to scroll right down to the bottom, because I genuinely think it was the first episode. And you're the one who pushed me into it, podcasting. You're the one who said you have to do this. After I remember when we did the first one at Cubes and I was on Rx'd.
Yeah, that was good. I remember that.
I remember sweating the house down.
Dude, and now look at you.
I'd love to start. I mean, look, people... We've got a bit of a different audience now. So people are going to know who you are, and then there's going to be new people that come in and don't know Prescript and so on. So I'd love to hear the origin story. I know it, but for people to, this is going back. So
jeez. Yeah, I don't know. It's okay. I'll give you like the Coles Notes version of it. And I'll try and be as objective as I can. So I graduated chiropractic college in like the San Francisco Bay Area in 2015 and went into my own clinical practice right away. As I graduated with a friend of mine, Jordan Genta, who's now my business partner. And we wanted to do it right. I mean, if you have an Australian-based audience, chiropractic might mean something a little bit different than what it means in America. So we wanted to kind of do it on the up. We were willing to take it on the chin, work hard, long hours, but not sell out to PI, insurance, workers' comp, things like that. Like both of us came from an athletic background. We were competing in strength sports at the time, him CrossFit, Olympic weightlifting, and I in powerlifting. So we just sort of we would meet every week and just kind of discuss different systems. Like none of us had a formal business background. We were just sort of meatheads that wanted to stick around sports as long as we could, and we probably knew we weren't going to be able to do that with a barbell for our whole lives, or at least as long as we wanted to. So maybe we could have a hand in it in the clinical side of things. So we would meet up on a weekly basis, and we were one of maybe a handful of our graduating class that actually toughed it out in the Bay Area. Like the Silicon Valley is a very, if this is a startup podcast, like the Silicon Valley is a very ruthless place, very unforgiving place to live and work. And that's if you're in technology. So if you're in health sciences, it's altogether an industry that's just pushed the wayside. So, we definitely struggled out of the gate, him and I, and we would get together and they just turned into therapy sessions. Like, dude, what are we going to do? Like, this is a nightmare. Why did we choose? Is it too late to go back to school? Can we do something else? And so, we would help ourselves. Like, I know the point of sale software I use. It was on recommendation of him. And then I actually had friends of mine. I was doing like quote unquote content at the time for Mind Pump podcast, which is like bigger in the fitness space. And it just kind of like dawned on me. I was like, okay, like this is a viable business option. I seem to do well when I do it with them. We could probably do this in-house. And so that's like got the wheels turning. And we actually started the podcast and the company Prescript at the same time. So our initial idea was like, and we were not first to market by any stretch of the imagination. It's like, well, we'll throw our hat in the ring, in like the online training space. We can offer training programs, and we thought our niche might be specific to like injury rehabilitation. So we kind of came up with these models around rehab, really just aggregating our clinical experience of with the athletes that we tend to work with. What are the common things that we prescribe from an exercise point of view for people with shoulder injuries, knee injuries, hip injuries, and so on and so forth? And we could pre-package those and distribute them. So give us a little bit of differentiation, hopefully a little bit of residual income to just help keep the lights on. And that was it. So that was really just kind of like one day we both sort of had this idea like, hey, I've been thinking. It's like, I've been thinking too. And then that was sort of the singularity moment behind both the podcast, RX Radio and Prescript. And Prescript started just as that. It was just like a training company. So we spent consciously the first 6 months just getting a podcast out there because we needed an audience to sell to. At the time, our social media platforms really weren't anything to anything to really to boast about. So we're like, okay, let's build a podcast, a more intimate medium to have an audience that will hopefully convert. So it's very premeditated in that sense.
What year? Wait, so when we're talking starting the podcast, how long ago was that? Because you were podcasting before I think I knew what a podcast was.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's such a weird thing to say that, because I felt late in the game when I started, just because, mentors of mine like, Adam, Sal, Justin, and Doug, the guys from Mind Pump, was already seemingly so well established, and they had a studio and whatnot at a time where the accessibility of, stuff like this was so rare, few far between, and expensive. 2016. Yeah, we've been running, and we're on 300, maybe 400 episodes now on a weekly release since 2016.
What was the adoption like? Was it, because again, I'm just thinking back then, was it quick? Did you guys see fire straight away? Was it just the kind of same old story, just consistency? Yeah,
and I think not only did we not see fire, but we didn't even look for smoke. Like, I think that if we're sticking with the analogy, I think that would be something that a lot of people, because we bootstrapped the hell out of it. There's something back then called Feed Burner. Like, y'all lucky. You guys are doing Libsyn or Blue Rare Podcast, all these different hosting services, which we now adopt, and it's helped with like analytics and data and stuff like that. But we would host the podcast for free. I spent about 3 or 4 nights, entire nights, on YouTube tutorials, like how to figure out how to utilize a pre-existing website to hack the RSS feed that exists in every website, to turn blog posts into things that iTunes and Spotify wasn't even around back then, but basically how iTunes and maybe SoundCloud, how they can utilize that and not know that it's some special server. So I figured out a way to do it for free, because like when I say we had no money, like we had less than no money. We had 2 kids out of grad school with probably like $500,000 combined in debt, and so it's like we were nickel and diming it to basically. We got some money together between the 2 of us and bought one, bi-directional mic, and we hooked it up to GarageBand. And I remember the first episode, there's like some weird thing with GarageBand where it'll only record 4 seconds at a time. So we recorded our first episode. We're like, that was sick. And we got 4 seconds of it. So like it almost didn't get off the ground. But as far as your original question, like, yeah, it wasn't even something that we were looking to. Like, we definitely had a long-term. A vision is probably not the right way to frame it, but we definitely had. This is going to be something that will pay off in the long run. So we're not going to get disheartened by 37 downloads a month or 100 downloads a month. It was probably years, and honestly years, over 100 episodes for sure, before we even figured out how to look at analytics with this sort of rigged up way that I was uploading the podcast. So yeah, it wasn't anything that it was fun. And like, if you go back and listen to it, we couldn't do it again. Like, we couldn't record those episodes and release them now with the audience that we have. There's no way we'd be able to get away with it. It's only because there was only 37 people who were listening that was like, oh shit, like they said that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was fun. But I think part of the fun was like just not giving a shit.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine back then as well, and then that's like it's kind of. I mean, that's the startup story, right? That's the origin to most. It's like, oh, we have this vision, or like this kind of plan that we don't really think is going to happen, right? But we're going to work our asses off to get there anyway. And then as time goes by, you start to, you have to get a little bit more professional, and you start to believe, and you see, those kind of like little results that come through that go, oh, maybe I can do this. But it's like the origin of the startup story.
Yeah. The biggest thing it just taught us was iteration. Like, the podcast taught us how to iterate very quickly. And I think that, to me, is like one of our underlying assets as a business right now. And there's a few other things that I think point to some of the success that we've been having that may be atypical, but just like the attrition and the ability to just iterate and move quickly. And it sounds so cliched, but like, it was 100% that. Like, there were so many times where there's like logistical errors or financial issues, or even on the podcast end, let alone the business end, was just like, this is, we need to be able to move around this and figure out a way to restructure the business to kind of, quote unquote, like stay alive. And the podcast was definitely a lower risk arena for us to start to play around with these. So then by the time the business kind of kicked off, it was like, okay, like we have a pretty good way of making decisions, and we move fast. Like, we move really fast.
At what point did you start to actually look like? So, I mean, I know you well, right? So I kind of think I can piece it together in my head, but it's like, I look at you as someone who's done really well at being able to understand who their customer is, and really well, and then actually action that. At what point did you actually start to, because I feel like the podcasting game might have been a really good kind of soundboard for you to understand what people are connecting with, maybe what they're not. And you just mentioned that, you guys were great at iterating and kind of adapting and moving pretty quickly. Was there a point where you started to use the podcast as that soundboard and kind of get the feedback, or is it more when social media come in?
No, I don't. I just do shit because I like it. And the thing is, like, we don't try and reach an audience. We have, like, the audience just find us. Like, the point, like, if I had to pinpoint a particular event or behavior when that stuff started to click, and it wasn't anything premeditated. A lot of what we do, like connections we make or relationships we make, like I strategically put myself in rooms where I know my ability to, to really execute on an opportunity. Like, there's a lot of what I do that's premeditated.
We're going to go there. Because I think that's, for me, when I look at you, what I feel like that's the unspoken about law, like that you don't, like, for me as well, it's kind of like, it actually probably, I was probably a little bit slower. Like, I was always like, get smarter. But really, I think it's that as time's gone by, it's like, well, what is smarter, right? And how do you start to navigate? And I think that's, I feel like that's something that you've been able to do really well. But it is, again, it's one of those things that early on in business, you don't necessarily... it's like that unspoken law, like that when you speak to people that have been in business for, say, 10 years, that's probably what they speak about and that's what they're telling. But then it's like, before that, it takes a while to get, to understand that side of business. But how do you look at it then? Because I think that, like, there's going to be people that are listening to this that are early on in business. How do you look at that? Like, how do you explain that to someone?
That's tough.
Because it's like, the rule book, like, if, the rule book is the 48 laws of power.
Right, yeah.
That's the written rule book, in my opinion.
It's so funny because, like, I'll read that going into, like, I was just telling someone the other day about, like, a meeting I had in Florida and understanding a little bit about the guy I was going into a room with. And this might actually differentiate and be able to clearly draw a line and maybe answer your first question about, like, that inflection point of, like, okay, how did the podcast start to really land with the audience rather than... So with the podcast, it was just like, we just did whatever, and we were able to, people who thought the way we did or spoke the way we did finally maybe, like, found somewhat of a voice rather than us going out to look for, like, I don't curate the podcast to anyone. I don't curate anything to anyone across the board, right? Like, I'm pretty, I hate the term unapologetic because it sounds like some woke chick shit to say, but, like, I don't care. So then the more I'm into this, like, not that I don't care, like, there's nothing I care about more than, like, the business and the people we work with, but, like, I won't sacrifice values, morals, whatever. If you don't want to say a certain word, I'm not going to work with you. Like, there's stuff like that where I'm just very unwavering in my approach and just, like, relentlessly authentic, because I've seen what happens when you're not that. On the flip side, to kind of explain, this strategic premeditation part of the business when it comes to a networking perspective, like, it is just a matter of putting yourself in the right room and understanding that you provide value, and doing that and being strategic is not malicious. Like, I don't have a malicious bone in my body when it comes to stuff like that. Like, the values run the business, and that's something we talked about in one of the earlier podcasts. Like, what is a brand? It's really an expression of personal values and beliefs. And the first part is, and the hardest part is actually figuring out what those are, right? So again, if I were to say, okay, there was an inflection point where our message started to land better, it wasn't finding the audience, it was actually finding out what my message was, right? So, like, I haven't, other than talking to you, that's the extent of my business development, is just being friends with you for however many years it's been. Like, but on the personal development side, like, I've been in continuous therapy for 7 years. And then it wasn't until I started to realize things about myself that it was like, oh, okay. And that's why I'm so, again, I hate the word, but, like, unapologetic in the way that I act, because I know I don't have any malice towards anyone. When I say something and I'm joking. And if someone gets offended, it doesn't mean they're right. So that was sort of an inflection point for me. But carrying that into, bigger decisions or talking about partnerships or things with bigger consequences, and I'm strategically put myself in these places, unbeknownst to whoever I'm in a room with. Like, it wasn't happenstance that I was in that room, but I understand, like, I'm providing value. I'm providing value to these people. I'm help solve a solution. I'm going to make whatever their endeavor is better. And I just need to convince them it was their idea. At the end of the day, if it's a win-win across the board, like, I'm not doing this in a Trojan horse manner to start to try and steal or leech off someone. Like, I know that the service that either I or the company offers is something that they need. And, you know, we'll work harder than anyone to make sure that they get the result that our product will, or service will sort of guarantee. And in that way, I have no moral qualms with it. And trust me, I am kind of like you were, and a lot of people struggle with, like, it seems predatory. And a lot of people use that feeling to self-sabotage themselves from actually doing it. Or it's a signal that they're not actually confident or competent in what they're selling.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, again, it's one of those two things. I'm not, you know, confidence versus competence, but then under the ability to understand, you talked about it before, but it's like there's a lot of inner work, or like understanding yourself, you know, like that goes into that, because it's like, and it comes out in everything you do, right? Like an opportunity, you know, there's no shortage in the world. There's opportunities everywhere. I think when you get confident in yourself, or you build that competency in what you do, you just get better at spotting those and then putting yourself in the positions to capitalize. Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, it's like when you get to a point where you have both of those two things, that's when you just start taking opportunities, and one leads to another. And that's, people talk about networking, right? But I think, like, it's not. And I was talking about, I had a guy on a couple of weeks ago, like, you know, the amount of money this guy's made is ridiculous. But and he kind of talked about it. He goes, what you start to realize is networking isn't just about knowing people, but it's about being able to identify who are the 3 or 4 people that can really, you know, catapult me into the position that I want to be in. But it's also like, well, in that position, I'm not the bad guy for doing that. Because in fact, you know, for me to get what I want out of the situation, like you said, you have to get that person what they want, right? And it's kind of like that. But you know, again, it comes back to the ability to see it that way.
And I think networking is tough. Like, in our industry, and I'll speak just to fitness, because networking, if you're a lawyer, is everything, right? Like, if you're in real estate, it's everything. In fitness, I think a lot of people will try and adopt, like, these bigger business like concepts of, like, networking, and they'll go to these what's the term people are using now, these weekend getaway things, masterminds. They'll go to these, and which is like, I don't know, like, it's reps and sets here. Let's not get it twisted. Like, I work in the fitness industry. We're not fucking curing cancer here. But and people get it stuck in their head that a way to accelerate your fitness business, albeit, you know, shares a lot of similarities with business on the whole, is to, like, network. And it's like, I don't network, I build relationships. Because on the flip side, and this is something I think worth touching on, it's the same thing that allows me to have the utmost confidence in walking into a room that I put myself in, is I have the utmost confidence that I'd walk directly out of that room if something didn't align with my values. And that's where the decision-making process becomes easy, because as your business scales, the consequence of not being able to make decisions quickly is equally, inaction is a verb, right? So if you can't make decisions quickly, that's you doing something to hurt your business. So having that very cut and dry, black and white way to make decisions gets you in a lot of rooms, but also gets you out of a lot of rooms really quickly and with no regret. Because there's been opportunities we've had with things that have turned out to just be networking, because I didn't build a relationship. I didn't like the underlying, call it instinct, of who we were potentially getting into business with or in partnership or whatever. And I just squashed it. It's like, oh man, that company went off and did X, Y, and Z. And I was like, okay. I lose zero sleep over any dollars and cents over that, but I would lose sleep if we made money and we're partnering with people that were inauthentic or disingenuous. So I think there's a flip side to that story that is also worth telling, because if you don't have that and you don't know when to walk out, you're not really confident with who you are as an extension or the center point of your brand, then you could end up not only getting into rooms but not being able to get out of rooms.
Yeah, like that's and they hurt you more.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Especially these
missing
days.
the opportunity versus putting yourself into the wrong one or getting involved with the wrong people. That's usually, like if we talk about brand, you can't really quantify a brand, but you can definitely feel when your brand's being hurt.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it talks to the emotional nature of that side of business and the psychology side of it as well. Again, like you talked about building relationships, and to somebody who's new to that, right? Like, how does? Because again, I just want to be able to, for the listeners to be able to identify the difference between what you said around networking and that building that relationship, and how you actually do that. Because it's a skill. Like, the reality is, I think back to the first time we met, right? And like genuinely, because it's the epitome of the story, right? Like, of kind of what we're talking about is like, I remember like being in San Fran and thinking, we were messaging and I was like, yeah, we'll do a training session together. And to be honest, I'm not bringing much to that training session, right? But but then I was like, oh, cool, like, it'll be like a 20-minute drive. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I'm in San Fran in the city and I'm like, cool. And you message me and I'm like, fuck. And it was like 3-hour train ride, 3.5-hour train ride. And there was a part of me was like, should I do this? Right? And then I was like, nah, fuck it. I'm going to do it. Right? And I think, but then it's like, I think that's a part of it. Like, that's the realizing that. And like, to be honest, like, that was me naturally at the time being like, cool, like, I don't know if anything's going to come of this, but hey, the worst case scenario is I get to see someone deadlift 300 kilo. And I'm like, fucking, that's awesome. Like, cool. And like the fact that you were talking to me on Instagram at the time, I'm like, I fucking owe it to this guy to go say hello, right? And to me. And then it was like, we obviously hit it off, right? Yeah. But I think like that is being able to see that, right? And being like, cool, like at the end. And then it's like after that, right? It's like the relationship that you build with that person over time and the investment that you make. Not, like, because you're right. Like when you're building a business as well, like you've got this dichotomy there where time's your biggest asset, right? And it's like knowing where to invest that time, and kind of what situations to invest that time, as well. Because it's like you don't see the return on that kind of situation. It could be years, right? And I feel like that's the tough thing for someone to actually see.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to parse out there. Like, obviously, your value around your time projects you valuing my time, right? So the fact that you looked at that as like, well, he's been messaging me back and forth, I gotta go, because you respect the time it takes to message someone on Instagram, which someone who might be starting a business doesn't look at that as a cost of time. It's like, well, if you have 10 minutes left at the end of the day and you choose to use that 10 minutes to message someone back, that's a pretty big deal. So the fact that you valued your time, you projected that onto me, and that's clearly a trait unique of someone who's probably in a good position to pursue a business. But for me, like when it comes to the difference between networking and building relationships is like, and again, this might be a unique fitness thing, because like I don't think I'm necessarily the most apt in the business space. I have no formal training other than the 7 years that I've been running this company and the stuff.
I'm like, you can keep going, but that's going to be off the table in about 10 minutes.
Okay. But I'm just really passionate about what I do. And that's what I have. That is the brand. That's what I have to show through. And that's the easiest thing in the world for me to do. So like every single business opportunity I've had, every single relationship I've had is like, hey, do you want to train? Hey, you just want to get together and train? Like, that's it. I don't have to tell you, I'll show you. Like, hey, like I just got off a plane. I don't know. I don't want to like name drop, but I just got back from vacation with a friend of mine who's a very successful Australian businessman. And that's how it started. I was living in Bondi. I was like kind of bored out of my mind. I was just training every day. Didn't have anyone to train with. And this guy was there, and it's like I could sit down and ask him to, dude, if anyone, please. And this is maybe just a personal thing. Don't pick my brain. Don't pick my brain. Spot my back squat, right? Like show up and like actually train. Do not pick my brain. If you, Matt, like I'd love to sit down and pick your brain. You'd love to sit down and waste my time. right? Because it's like, I cannot tell you a relationship that I have with, like yourself or my other friends in the industry that did not start with weights involved. Because that's all not all I care about, but that's the foundation. When all is said and done, I'll always have that. And that's where the business centers around, is just a relentless, overwhelming passion for what we do. And that'll shine. Like 16 hours off a plane is a common thing in my life. And if there's someone in a city that I could connect with and like, oh, do you want to train? No, it's fine. I'll come right from the airport. The number of people I've met with my suitcase rolling into a gym and like, are you good to go? Like, yeah, let's do this. And because that's all. And it's not even some like tough guy thing. It's like, that's what I love to do. And if that can show through, then that's my offering to the start of a genuine relationship.
Yeah. Quick story, and then I've got something for you. But remember when I picked you up from Melbourne Airport when we were staying, and you're like, "Hey, I just got to go quick gym session, and then I'm flying to Sydney. I'll see you tomorrow." But that's the epitome of what you just kind of said. But there's something that like pricked my ears that you mentioned, and it's kind of like, and to be honest, like it's something that we actually do even with the podcasting that we do now, but understanding. Like the pick my brain thing. Like, you're in the gym. I think as an individual, in those kind of situations, like being able to read the room in a sense, like does this guy really want his brain picked in that moment? And I kind of bring it back to like something that it was funny. Like whenever I bring a guest on that I don't know, I watch podcasts and I actually don't really listen to what's said. I actually watch the body language of the person who's being interviewed, so I can pick up, is he enjoying himself? Is it a conversation that he wants to have? And there was a business guy. He actually, owned a few F45s and stuff like that. But I've watched all of his previous interviews that he'd done like the 3 months, and then like realized that this guy just got sick of telling his story, right? And then the second thing is he really was confident in his business brain. And these guys, and you could see it in his face, they're not asking the right questions to get him going. And so like he walked in and the first thing he said to me is like, all right, what's the deal? Like, what are we doing today? And I'm like, like I know what to say here. And I was like, I watched some of your previous interviews and like they were boring. And I was like, because, there's so much more to you. There's so much more. I want to unpack your business brain. And mate, like, big smile, and then like I didn't even ask him about his story. I was just like, boom, straight in, and it was amazing. It was a great interview. But then the biggest thing is the reciprocation that comes afterwards. He's like, man, that was awesome, that was amazing. And I think it's like the ability to understand that situation and read that is like such a big thing. That's like it kind of ties into what we're saying is like building that relationship, like he's going to go away now and he's going to, like, if I want another, if there's a guest, right, that I might want, there's a better chance for me now to get that guest because I did that. All right. And it's about reading that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because there's a reciprocation involved in that relationship. But it kind of comes back to what you said. It's like, I feel like that's a big part of, that word networking is like be an asset, but also be able to read the room, be able to read the person. But
like, yeah, showcase something about yourself other than something I can't find on fucking LinkedIn. Just like your boy. It's like, I could watch all these podcasts. Why? So we're going to do another podcast that's just like the other ones. It's like, and that's why I love training. I mean, I don't want to self-assign as like a meathead, but I mean, writing's on the wall. I want to know what you're about. Like if I'm in or I want you to know what I'm about, right? Depending on if we're looking at it in like a pseudo transactional way, like, will you go there? Because like I will. 16 hours off a flight, fuck yeah, let's go. Load the bar. I don't give a shit. Like there's relentless, whatever it is. I'm becoming known for a guy that doesn't sleep much, and it's not necessarily a point of pride, but it's a point of principle. It's like I'll do whatever the fuck it takes. Like and the way I can express that to someone that just met, who's like doesn't follow me on social, doesn't know the story. Yeah, no, 16 hours, no sleep. That's great. Hold on, let me grab a coffee real quick, and I'll tear the roof off this place, because that's how I'll do everything. And that, like if I'm on the other side of that, and someone's trying to like, hey, we want to get coffee, and so I can pick your brain. It's like, I'm going to get coffee at 6 a.m. by myself and enjoy my coffee. And I'm not going to have someone in my ear yet because I don't know anything about business. You wanted me to show you everything I know about business, come to the gym. Come to the gym. And we'll just fucking, I always think of the scene this is so stupid, but like the scene of the Batman movie where like the Heath Ledger Joker goes, you figure out, you know, who people really are when they die. How many of your friends have I killed? And the guy's like, 5. He goes, 5. And he goes, you want to know which ones of your friends were cowards? I've been with people as like, people are like trying to maybe get in and get a job with us or something. And I train with them. And I just said, you figure out who they are. It's like someone just stops a set. It's like, what are we doing here, man? It's like, no, I don't need someone that just stops when 10 reps is done or whatever. So and it might be too much of a beat-headed way to approach. Like, we don't have a human resources department for this reason. Why didn't he get the job? Because he left 3 reps in reserve. Like, we're not about that. Like, I want to turn it up to 10. So for me, like, all my relationships have just been me, like, displaying what I'm passionate about in the only way I know how. Like, to sit in a room with me and talk about business, like the tangibles of business, finance, legal. Yeah, I got some experience. You know, we've gone through some shit as any company that's been around for as long as we have would. But like, let me tell you, like, how to get through this stuff, right? And that's the real shit that I don't want to say you can't teach, but you have to experience. You have to see. You don't want to hear that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you can. You look across any field. You can know a lot of stuff, but until you're in the zone, you're in there on the battlefield, if you want to call it that, you don't really know anything, right? Because it's like Mike Tyson. Everyone's got a plan. You know what I mean? Like,
I've been punched in the face a lot.
Yeah. So all right, let's go. I want to go kind of back to startup. You know, let's say maybe first 4 years. What do you think you guys did right? You know, to be able to push it forward. You know, what do you think are some of the things that you guys, like, for someone listening who's either about to get into business or they've been in business for a little bit of time now? If you were to do it again, what would you identify? Not that you would change anything, right? But what would you identify and prioritize? I
think a conscious decision I made, again, like what limited business acumen I had / have, was putting the brand first, or attempting to put the brand first, right? Especially like in the fitness world, it becomes a cult of personality. And understanding that my personality was coming to the forefront and the brand wasn't. So my personal brand was starting to gain traction and getting opportunities. So I was getting approached by larger companies to overhaul internal education systems. I was doing a lot of personal educational content, but at the time, you got to remember that Prescript was just doing training content. Or it was just selling training products. So our first major shift was really a shift in the primary core of the business from a training company to an education company. Because my content on social media and YouTubes and podcasts was always a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more thought out. The fit of selling a training product, but really all my social media existing in an educational space, I personally got an opportunity to come in as an educator, which is great. I love that. I love that side of things. It was definitely something, a personal aspiration of mine at the beginning of my career, and the trajectory I took was broadly influenced by people who did that. But then I took kind of a step back and just having a few friends in the space who were struggling trying to put the brand first after so long having themselves at the forefront. You know, I took these personal opportunities and began to fold them into the company itself. So the contracts that were coming to me for Jordan Shallow and the Instagram handle and whatever, I put behind the veil of the company. So beginning to put the company first and the brand first is still something that, you know, is on the forefront of our agenda moving into end of this year and next year and so on. But I think in our space, it's very difficult to do that. People like that personal connection with that front runner. I was once called by a potential investor the dancing bear, just like I was the show, right? And so I think one thing that I did that I didn't even know that I was paying attention to my other friends who were struggling with this at the time, and only retrospectively have been able to look back and be like, oh, okay, like that was a very conscious decision. Like I could have profited off that personally and just put it in the bank account, but I knew that wasn't going to really be the exponent to the company that it needed. So I was able to fold that opportunity to shift the primary core of the business from a training company to an education company. And I think that was one of our first inflection points in the business, was really finding that, honestly, the market I had created finally had a product that fit it, really, if we wanted to like boil it down into business terms, where I was very heavy on the education side, thinking there'd be a transference of like, oh, this guy's smart, whatever that means, and therefore his education, or therefore his training programs must be smart. But realizing that, oh, this guy's smart, his education programs must be good. That was a tighter link that people didn't have to go under any sort of mental gymnastics to make that leap. And that was something I think that we did right in the first half, was like, okay, let's put the company first.
So when I hear that, I think it comes down to like, some key points is like understanding the roles that exist within a business, right? Like, because I reckon in an early stage business, it's very individual, right? It's like everybody's individual. Now, you are a team, right? And you have that team camaraderie, but everybody has certain things they're doing for the business, right? And then I guess the second point is around product market fit and something you mentioned before around like constant iteration, right? And like that ability to move quick. Because your role in the business is very different to, say, other people that were in the business, even when you started to get that traction. So, again, knowing you, like, I feel like you put that on your back and we're like, cool, like, this is where we can go. And then it's that constant iteration that comes through. And that is a startup. Like, if you're not constantly, if you think you've got the Hail Mary in business from the very beginning, trust me. And, I have to remind myself this, and everybody does, right? It's like even being 8, 9, 10 years into owning a business, but if you think you've got the Hail Mary, you don't. And only when you realize you don't do you constantly iterate. So it's like that. And the follow-up question to this is going to be around what are the lessons you're learning when you're scaling? But I guess, how do you think, is that something that you agree with? Like the kind of you understanding what your role was for the company and owning that, but then also playing into that kind of constant iteration to drive it forward.
Yeah, it's a continual growing pain, and I think it's a problem that tasks most founders. And I mean, that growing pain was expensive, and it was almost fatal, because you have to look at the bottom line. You have to look at the number of people you're servicing. You have to look at what your customers need, and are you the right person to service that? It's almost like there's this theory that forms of government should be dictated by the number of people that they're governing, right? So like a household, at least my household, dictatorship, right? Because there's 4 fucking people under one roof, and if Louis Shallow says it, you fucking do it, right? Because rain all hellfire if you don't. But, does a dictatorship work in Venezuela? It's like, probably not. I mean, based off the number of people starving to death, you would argue that a dictatorship does not work, right? Democracy is the worst system we have, or it's the worst form of government, but it's the best one we have. So I look at it that way. And that was the hardest thing, was to me actually to recognize, because we talked earlier about the podcast, like knowing like when it caught fire, I was like, I wasn't even looking for smoke. And I'm still to this day, like, I'm not this is going to sound really bad, and any business people are probably going to give me the gears, but I'm not really a numbers guy, because I did it when I was broke, and I'm doing it now when the company's doing well. So like, it doesn't matter to me. I get to do it in cooler places with, more people, and I have, this awesome team with me that we can, grow this thing together. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is still me in a room. It's me in a room with a laptop. Like it's me in a room with an audience of people. And I think at the end of the day, I'll always have that. So it was hard for me to pull out and actually look and just be like, holy shit, like these rooms are getting pretty big, right? And like these books I'm writing, these courses, like to me at the time, like this is a lot. But I was still operating a form of government for like when we had 37 downloads on the podcast and we were selling like a handful of courses. So that was pain is knowledge really fast. We went through some growing pains that were a big wake up call. And honestly, we were just lucky that the business was where it was financially, that we could weather that storm. And I think that just speaks to like the passion of the founders and just being able to keep our head down and just fucking work. Because if we didn't work our fingers to the bone for the 4 or 5 years leading up to that event, this sort of potentially catastrophic growing pain, we wouldn't have survived. It still would have been me in a room, but it would have been a really dark room with no one around and no one to listen. So that was a wake-up call for me to actually take a look at the scale of it and be like, oh, okay, this is something where, I used to wear a tech hat. I can tell you what these cameras are, right? I can tell you about that switchboard. I can tell you about that iPad. I can tell you about this audio system. I can tell you all that. Because that was a hat I used to wear. I used to wear, sorry. And then I can tell you a little bit about finance. I can tell you a little bit about, CRM and email marketing. I can tell you a little. So because I wore those hats for a really long time and it worked for a really long time. And then I can tell you about functional anatomy and applied biomechanics until I blew it in the face after that. Because that's the primary core of my business. So it's realizing now it's becoming more difficult because it's like I have all these things. Like the core of my business, my role in the business is the creative side, big decision making around direction of the company, course development, and implementation. It was always that, but it was that and audio visual and how do I upload the podcast through FeedBurner and all that stuff. And so with seemingly smaller decisions, it was easier for me to, when financially viable, to just offshoot these out. Now it's like, these decisions where I have to okay, what hats am I still wearing? Like, what are the outer valence things that are distracting me from the core? But the thing with valence is, this is kind of like a chemistry reference, it's like these are strong charges. Like those valences do not want to let go, right? You don't want those to get out of your orbit, if you will. So the outer valence stuff became very easy, right? The outer valence stuff, like the audiovisual stuff. Oh wait, I can pay a service called Libsyn and they can just do this and it's way easier and it's not these 57 clicks that I have to go through every week. Sick, done. And then after that, it was like, well, I can pay a person to do it on Libsyn and record it. Cool, easy. Like I had no emotional attachment to this because I didn't see it as close to the core of the business. They were these outer valence things. But as we move inward valences, now we're talking like, big financial decisions around marketing, logistics, printing, apparel, shipping, all of these things. That's like, okay, this is starting to infringe on my core. So then finding the right people that you trust to start to take this, to take these charges, to take these things that are so close to your core and allow them to go out of your orbit, that was probably the most difficult thing. And it's still something. Now it's to the point where we have a really good team. My role is very clearly defined, but I still think it's something that in itself is iterative. And I try to think about what I do on a day-to-day basis that isn't the core, that I might be lying to myself. That's stuff that I like to control. And that cognition or that metacognition around finding things, and it's like you don't want it to be a preoccupation against what your actual stuff you need to get done, but about never giving that up and never thinking you've arrived, because as the business grows, the form of government has to grow and you have to let things go out of your orbit. So that's been something that day over day the importance of that has become more clear. And the process in finding those now what are inner valence very closely tied to me, sometimes so close that I don't realize that they're not a part of the core, to let those go so that we can keep moving forward. That's kind of where.
What are those things, right? So I think, because I think, not specifically, right? But those things that you do have to let go of that you probably didn't want to. What were those?
Yeah. Marketing's been big, making sure our message and our story lands in a way, because I remember having specifically a conversation with you about this years ago, about having marketing material that accurately reflects, our tone as a business, and making sure that the relationships we're building in that first touch point, albeit digital, are still representative of that, like the core passion that drives the business, right? Mm-hmm. No different than if I were to enter a room, right? And enter a room with someone and, just get a gut feeling like, no, it's definitely not a relationship I want to see. We look at marketing, or I look at marketing like building relationships with our customers, and that first impression is everything. So that was really hard to find someone who was able to write copy or, put up a campaign that really reflected, honestly, like my values, because marketing and values could get real dicey real quick. So that was one that was quite difficult. And, now we have a team. They always say, like, you're running a business when you hire people smarter than you. That's kind of where we're at. And that's an ego shot to me, man. Like, I built this off the backs of being someone who is respected as like an academic in the space, or at the very least an applied academic. I still coach, like I still go in and I work with, some of the best athletes in the world, primarily American football players. Like that means a lot to me. To not just be someone who's a talking head, like to actually be on the gym floor, having skin in the game with the things that I teach, right? Like it's no different. Someone would watch me on a gym floor with a 20, 30 million a year guy. It would be the same principles that I teach through the curriculum. So now to turn the keys over to some of that curriculum implementation is sort of the next iteration of, finding those intervalence things that for the company to grow, I need this energy to go somewhere else. So that's kind of where we're at now is, how can we empower some of our staff to be seen in that light as the talent that they are and the educators that they are, and me start to take not more of a backseat, but start to really just focus on like these big decisions, these creative directions for the company.
Guys, if you're loving this episode, make sure to take a screenshot, give us a tag, or even take a photo if you're watching it. Help spread the love. It helps us out dramatically. I've owned businesses now for 10 years, and let me tell you, it is hard enough as it is. Business insurance is just one of those things you don't want to have to worry about. I've been with BizCover now for 6 years, and they make it seamless. No hassle, no paperwork, and you can get insured instantly. So it's tax time. Do yourself a favor, go see if you can save some money and get a better deal. Yeah, and a lot of that is getting the right people, right? So I feel like, and so I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, because obviously the ability to go from startup to machine is all kind of, it's all literally, you got to have the, there's obviously moving parts like product, marketing, and so on, but inevitably it comes down to people, right? And getting the right people on the bus. How much do you think, there's this like two-sided question, how much do you think your ability to maintain the right message over a long period of time, the core message, the purpose, has factored into your ability to find the right people to bring in? Because you're building, again, the whole kind of conversation comes into one, but like you're building relationships over time, and you've got a message that people can align with, and then finding those people to bring in to take care of some of those things that need the love that they need, but you're taking you away from the thing that you need to do.
Yeah, I think for me it's I hate to use cliches, but I guess they're cliches for a reason. Like it is kind of the lead from the front, and I'm lucky to be in a position. I think most coaches, regardless of like what their aspirations are, I think would look, and I get it a lot, like I get to travel around, I get to do all this stuff. There's a lot of shit people don't see. Like I was on a call with an attorney this morning about this annoying little case that we had. And, I think of my entrepreneurial life, like the Mark Twain quote about golf. It's just a good walk spoiled. Like it's funny because I index things in my brain a certain way. It's how I approach exercise. And I've been in some really cool play. I love to travel. I really have a fitness business to facilitate my travel addiction, I think is the way it's shaking out now. And I've been in, 50 countries, maybe more in the last couple of years. But regardless of where I am, I'm always plugged in, right? So I've been in central Turkey to the middle of the desert, the Middle East, to basically the Arctic Circle, and you're just walking around and your phone rings. And you're like, fuck. But you take that call, right? Luckily, my wife now she's great. She gets it. She'll even like take pictures and make fun of me. Like I was on the back of a camel 4 weeks ago, and I'm on a call with like our marketing director or something. And it's just like entrepreneurial ship is just a good walk spoiled, because it's like, yeah, everyone's like, oh, you get to go everywhere and just have this freedom of time and place. But it's like, yeah, but guess what? And when those call, you accept those fucking charges, and you do it with a smile on your face. Doesn't fucking matter what else is going on. And that's the biggest thing is if you put in my mind anyways, and I only have this business to really attribute this principle to, but if you put out the energy or that inauthenticity out into the world, that's what you're going to get. So it's like ruthlessly diligent to maintain that. And it becomes easier the more you do it. But like people know, like if it's work related, I don't care. I don't care what else is going on in the world. I'm answering this fucking phone. I'm on this fucking text message. Like I'll leave. Like if the phone rang right now and it was something to do with the business, I'm gone. Like, and it's been times where I've had to cancel plans, birthdays, whatever. It's like, I do not care. And I think when it comes to just getting those quality people, we talk about like making that machine from startup to machine. I think too often people look at that analogy and go, oh, I need cogs. So you don't. You need fucking operators, right? And I need operators that look up the chain of command and go, that guy's still on the front line taking bullets. Like one thing everyone always says, like, I don't know how you do it. And it's like, okay, then you don't get that relentlessness that it takes to be in this position. But every single dude that works and girl that works with us gets it. They look at that and be like, okay. So that for me that's it. To attract good people, like you have to put that out there. And I think a lot of people, and again, fitness, I don't want to pick on fitness, but it's all I really know. A lot of people want to like start a fitness business so they can go live in Bali. It's like, oh, so you want to like start this business so you can just work from anywhere. It's like, there's one problem with that equation is when you start a business, you start it so you have to work from everywhere, right? I can tell you last time I took a vacation per se that I wasn't just on my laptop at least 5 or 6 hours in the morning, right? It's just that good walk spoiled. So with the people side of things, it just comes down to you. Like, what are you willing to put out? No one gets a job with us expecting that they're not going to work hard, right? Expecting that, you know, if 3:30 a.m. comes along, like there's no end to the workday here, right? Because it'd be one thing if I was like clocking out at 5, putting on my turn off notifications and you text me and I don't text you back. It does not matter where I am in the world. It does not matter what time of day. If anyone reaches out on staff with any question about anything, right back. And it's like that. I don't ever demand, oh fuck, these are like some of my closest friends in the entire world. What the fuck am I saying? I don't ever expect that reciprocation, but I get it because they're just the same type of fucking just relentless operator.
It's an obsession, right? Like that's the way I like to think of it. It's like when you're obsessed with something, like nothing else matters. Yeah. And I think you're right. Like a lot of, you know, it's funny, you know, because like a lot of people, like, you know, I've recently started 2 new businesses, right? And everyone comes up to me who doesn't own a business and says, you're fucking killing it. And I go, if only, you know, like we are in the very beginning, or like it's going so well. And then there's like that, but it's the outside looking in type thing. But it's like, we're like, man, we're a startup. Like it's like, you know, but it's like the whole, not understanding what goes into it or why we make certain decisions when you own a business, when you love something so much, right? And I think but what I'm trying to get across here is that like it's like, no, well, like it looks like it's going well. Like, and it's like, it's not that it's not going well. It's not that it's not going well, but it's like, fuck, like like it's, if you only seen what was going on behind the scenes, right, then you would understand. It's like, you know, like it's like kind of that don't bother me thing. Like, you know, like kind of being in a room with someone, right? And you know, you ever had a conversation with someone and you're like, fuck, like what do I say to this? Because it's like I can't connect with it because they don't truly understand what's going on, right?
I get that to a certain degree, but do you ever reflect on yourself and think that you might not get what's going on and think that the personal value behind what that person values behind success is not monetary, right? When I hear that, because I get similar worlds, man. Like we've run parallel universes and we intersect and we collide and it's fucking amazing. But like I hear that, and most people who look for financial security really want freedom. And here we are with all the freedom in the world looking for financial security. We're both in a room. We both don't understand each other because we both don't understand what people value, right? And that's something that I get a lot. And I struggle with it because, you know, in the startup mindset, like especially coming from the Silicon Valley, it's like that exit, that sale, that's the golden ticket, right? Like 3 to 5 year exit, you know, big evaluation. What's your EBITDA? What's your industry multiplier? Like I get all this shit, but it's like I need to bring myself back and go, I never cared. I never had any.
Yeah,
and like, so that's for me, like, and that's something I don't want to say I wrestle with, but it's something that actually brings me a lot of enjoyment is sort of recapitulating or recalibrating, probably be a better word, my values on a day to day. Cause like I get lost. I don't give a shit. Like I don't say I don't care about money. Cause like money is great and I don't have to sit on the back of the plane anymore. But I did it when there was none. I'll do it when there's none left, if there's some left. So what I really wanted was freedom, and I have that. And I think when we talk to people who go, you're killing it, I get that. You know, because you don't want to hear that, because in your mind you're not, because you know people like who have killed it, like the 9-figure exits and all this stuff. But I don't care. Not I don't care, but I have to tell myself that a day to day that like I've already made it, right? Like, dude, I should be putting fucking doors on a minivan in some factory in some shithole opioid town in the south of Ontario. Like, I get to do whatever the fuck I want. But it is hard, because you don't want to hear that, because I put my blind. This is why I don't look back, and this is why I like talking to you sometimes about like, and even just seeing you and like, this is ridiculous compared to 2 dusty kids in some fucking powerlifting gym 6 years ago or whenever it was. I don't like to look back, because it's like, looking back to me is like looking down when you're afraid of heights. You're like, that's a long way down. And you're looking back, you're like, this is a really long way to go. So when someone tells me like, oh, you're killing it, it's like, I freak out, man. Like, I just get like completely lose it. Like, no, don't tell me that. It's like, because it's the speed that I'm not, if I look at it in retrospect, it kind of freaks me out. So for me, it's like, I totally get that apprehension around that misunderstanding, but like, I'm able to kind of, oh, this person values freedom, and I have that, and maybe they're kind of right. Yeah,
I 100%. I think the thing, like when I think about it, right, is like, it's not like the what's the right word? I don't want to call it praise, but it's like that thing coming from the outside is like, that's not why I'm doing this. Like, right. You know, like because it's like, it's not the monetary game that I'm playing. It's like, I like to build shit, and I like to do things, because it's like, morally, if I was the other way, it wouldn't be me. Right. You know, like I've never fucking had a job. Yeah. Like, and it's like, because it doesn't sit with me. Like, and there's nothing wrong with having a job, but it's like, and you know, this is just life. We you know, we often, you know, nobody really knows what anyone's going through. Nobody really knows what's going on inside someone's head, or why they do certain things. Like, we can guess, but it's like, I think that's the idea of it. And I feel like, you know, if I was to give advice to someone who was starting a business, it would be like, if you're starting a business purely to make money, turn around, right? Because you might not make money for 5 years. And it's like, only if you can get to that point, that's when you, and truly you learn that when you stop caring about the money and you start focusing on everything outside of that, do you actually start to grow and make progress, right? But it's like that whole idea of like, I'm killing it, is like, well, no, like, I'm not, I'm building it.
But the adulation is an effect, not a side effect. That's it. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's a thing that is when you're on your way to doing it. So it's just like, I don't worry. I see it as like this thing that freaks me out when people like, because I don't look up, I don't look back, I just look forward. I just drop my head, I close my eyes, and I run through anything that gets in my fucking way. Yeah. So when someone like pulls my head up for a second, and it's just like, man, smell the roses.
Yeah, 100%.
It freaks me out, man. I'm like, yo, I'm moving fast. Like, this is crazy. Where were we 5-6 years ago? But at the same time, it's like, that is not a side effect. That is not avoidable when you do that. Like, no one pulls you out of your lane to like stop you if you're already stopped. So it's not a side effect. It's just an effect. It just is what it is, because it is hard to hear. It is hard to hear that, because you don't want to give yourself credit, because you know what you're capable of. And you know, if you just keep this on the tracks and you keep just running through or moving around anything that gets in your way, it's like, if you think this is something, just wait.
Yeah, that's the feeling, right? It's like, oh, yeah, 100%. That's the feeling. I think, yeah, I think it's one of the things that business owners have to get good at managing those feelings and those conversations as well, because it's like, you have so many of them, no matter where you're at.
But I think what a great opportunity to recalibrate, right? Like, getting to see you is you're almost a flashbulb memory. It's like, every time I see you, it's something special. Like, it's so rare that we get to cross paths in the last like 4 or 5 years, and since we've started, you know, this crazy parallel universe. But it's nice to be able to make sure, like, again, I don't know why it's a Mark Twain hour, but like, if you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. And every time someone that tells me that, oh, you're killing it, I say the same thing, because if I ever didn't, I'd know. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? That's a canary down the coal mine, and my ego taking the reins of this operation. Like, don't let it get bigger than.
Yeah, it's like the whole, you know, like if I ever turned around and said yeah to someone,
Yeah,
like
bro.
fucking,
Yeah.
I'd fucking.
Seriously,
You know
no,
what I mean?
yeah,
Like-
you'd have to have some pretty, and I think you need systems in place for that, because I know people that do, and their businesses, you know, maybe not in the short term, but long term will reflect that inability to catch that little lapse in their perception of just how small you really are, right? Or, you know, you'll figure it out in a very visceral fashion very quickly if you don't. So I think that self-awareness is a gift. That frustration is important to recognize, because it means that you're still on the path towards where you want to end up, where you know you can end up, because you see it with the opposite, and that is never realized. That potential is never realized.
It's like, you know, I think of Elon when that happens. Like, you know, he's a character, obviously, right? But it's like, I think it was like he passed Jeff Bezos in like being the richest man in the world, and then like it's like he got tagged on it on Twitter, and then his like reply was, "Cool, back to work." Like, do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, I think obviously he's a special guy, right? Like, he's doing some fucking amazing things, but it's like that mentality of like, you know, he's probably, you know, he's even said like he'll never achieve what the mission is, and I think like there's power in that, because he knows he has to pass it down to someone, right? And it also shows that, you know, there's no exit for him, right? It's like he's on this kind of journey, if that makes sense. And I think that's what makes a great business owner, right? Like, you know, we talked about how do you get a startup off of the ground? Well, fuck, like there's one thing that you have to actually fucking get it anywhere, and that's resilience, right? It's still running through the walls. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's an interesting conversation around the perception, the different perceptions around business and business owners. But so what are the lessons now that you're scaling, right? Like, because you are in that phase, like you are kind of, it's a very different business to what it looked like, you know, 5-6 years ago. So what are the toughest things that you're finding now? The things that you're kind of, when I say tough, it's not hard, but it's challenging, right? It's like, what are the things that you're noticing?
Now we need to establish systems of decision making to make sure we effectively allocate resources in a time effective manner, because there are consequences now where we just have a procedural filter that we put things through before it reaches the head, the heart, or the gut. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of like really doubling down on like the head part of the decision making process. Like, if I were to define the head, the heart, and the gut is how we really make decisions. The heart and the gut are solid. That's how I made decisions all the way up in my life. And like, I'm not a numbers guy. I'm not a business guy. So for me, understanding that three-headed monster is really what allows us to make decisions quickly, and understanding and auditing those three, and understanding that, look, heart, yeah, like I understand the value of personal development alongside business development. It's something we've talked about since the jump. The gut, I don't know if it's something that can be trained, but it's definitely something that I'm always aware of. Like, I always check in on instincts. I'm aware of my behaviors enough to be able to analyze how I act or react to certain things, and I can parse that. I can parse out the good and the bad from that to help me make a decision. But the head, it's kind of been dormant, if I'm being honest. Like, it's too worried about writing textbooks or delivering seminars or lectures or things like that. But now it's like, okay, how do we make systems that we can filter information around like what we have coming down the pipe as far as opportunities go? Because we've said yes up till just about everything up till now. And at the level that we're sort of playing at, some of the decisions are going to be so taxing on our manpower resources or financial resources or the resource of time, that we need to be very strategic with how it is we make those decisions moving forward. And sometimes it's not a matter of no, just not right now. So being able to filter that criteria in a very through a very objective lens and go, okay, you know, I might feel this way, I might have this instinct, but at least give that head component of the decision making triad a fair shake, because I just haven't really looked at it, right? Like, I've been able to make decisions on the fly based off those other two, and it's been great. But now it's like the consequences aren't just mine anymore, right? Like, when you have people that are relying on you to you know, earn a living, it's your responsibility to do everything you can to make sure that this thing is successful. So, understanding that that's a weak point for me is, and we literally just had this conversation this morning about what are the criteria that we need to put in this filtering process that makes up this sort of like 3-pronged approach to making decisions quickly and looking at our roadmap for, next year, next quarter, next 3, next 5, and what it is we're really going to pursue and in what order. So that's really where we're at right now, as far as like, how it is, what are our systems to scale, what are our weak points, where do we need to address. It's really like at sort of this meta level of just, where opportunities are coming at us at a point where we still need to move quickly. So it's not so much getting lost in the weeds, but how is it that we can easily filter out and bin and categorize these opportunities in not even like purely objective, because I still think the subjective should reign true. If doesn't sit well with me in the head and the heart, it's out. But if the heart and the gut, if the head is the decision maker, it needs to be as well trained an arm of this operation as the gut and the heart. So
what are the inputs then? Right. So what are the inputs that you use to train that? Because it's a great point, and I think the idea is like, as you said, you've kind of gotten to where you have on heart and gut, and that's kind of the emotional understanding, really highly emotionally intelligent. But then there's the what you said about there's greater leverage now associated to the consequence of making the wrong decision financially, or anything associated with kind of the head side of what you're talking about. Yeah. So what are the inputs that you're using to, we go back to that word, iterate and kind of make those improvements and learn?
A lot of it's people, putting people in the right places, our finance team, our legal team, our marketing team, and then just really putting their data up on a board and just like, this is what it is. This is how much this decision will cost us, right? Obviously, like overall impact on the bottom line is one of like the underlying criteria as far as the data is concerned about whether or not we do something or we don't do it, or when we do something. It's probably more likely if something's on our roadmap. I'm more like a dog with a bone. Like, you ask my mother, you ask like the wife. It's like, if I get my mind set on something, like come hell or high water, before I'm lowered into this ground, that'll get fucking done. So it's really not a matter of if, but a matter of when, and just being able to prioritize things. So the bottom line is always the bottom line. That's going to be one. Return on investment is another one. It sort of falls into bottom line. Resources, manpower. How much are we going to have to expense, and where is that resource potentially leveraged in a better place? So just creating, honestly, like a coefficient to round out that head part of the heart, the head and the gut. Just creating a coefficient around some of those more tangible, cold, objective metrics, and then weighing them up against the rest of the equation.
Sounds like you've added a lot of structure. Yeah. Sounds like the structure of the company's grown dramatically over time. Like, as you said, putting people in the right areas, like you're talking finance, legal teams, and like 67 years ago, like they were there. Like it sounds like now it's very operationally driven as well. So like, one thing I'm interested in is how has not your role, but from 6 to 7 years ago as a startup now to what you do now, what has changed in say your day to day? And you say, like, how many meetings are you on? Like what does that look like? You talk about finance teams, you talk about legal teams, you're talking about strategy, you're talking about structure. It sounds like it's come a long way, right? So how do you manage yourself now and to be ultimately productive while still having to play a role that you have to play?
Yeah, I think I've haphazardly fallen into something that might be a habit that people who are purposely trying to get to where I'm at have imparted early. And it's just having the right people around. Like, the people I'm around know what I'm good at, and they know its importance to the primary core of the business. And the gaps that I have in my skill set or in my attention span are filled by just really good people. And my co-founder is top tier. Like, you couldn't ask to be in business with like a better guy. And he understands my role. And so when it comes to legal and finance, we have a legal and finance and marketing team, and I'm a little bit more closely involved in the marketing side. But when it comes to the real brass tacks of business stuff, like the cover your ass, the T's and C's, all this contract stuff, operating agreements, things like that, honestly, and I don't try to, but as a consequence of just running very efficient, because the one thing that you got to remember, like our business is not conventional in the sense that we've ever had an office, right? In the past 7 years, I've been running this business from a fucking airport lounge.
So what you say is you've taken on the work from home culture.
I don't have a home.
How could
I have a work from home culture when I haven't had a fucking primary residence for 4 years?
You guys have always been doing that, right?
And that's the COVID proofing the business is like another thing that we could talk about. But that was how the business grew. It was an effect of that. It wasn't a side effect of that. So if I had an office every day that we'd come to and we had this team, I would probably be more directly involved. But I think purely by the fact that I'm in the last 3 weeks, I've been in 5 continents, right? Like all have done 30 something flights this year. It's June. I'm on pace for probably 70 plus flights. Like I've done 175,000 kilometers in the air since the middle of March. So it's like, I can't sit in boardrooms. I can't go to offices. So it's like, unless I've scheduled meetings twice a week with our founders, and they are spending not the rest of their week, because operationally we're pretty tight, but direct contact with legal team, unless I need something, like unless it's something like this morning, that's usually like the pinnacle, is like a 10-minute conversation with the lawyer, just to dot the I's, cross the T's, get my opinion on it. But that's the lead up of that particular, it was a small incident, but that was probably 3 or 4 weeks worth of work for our back end guys. So Junta just airtight, like does not fucking miss. Like you want to talk about a smooth operator, that guy. So the people, and my assistant Renee, she's been with me for 3 or 4 years, and it's not a coincidence that 3 or 4 years ago the company really started to take it a stride. It's having her hand in things, making sure I don't miss, and then just putting me in the right position to take the shot. So my day to day is exactly, for the most part, and there are things that I'm trying to chip away at. And there are things that I'll have done for the final, like course curriculum writing, I'll probably have done for the final time this year. I'll write my last textbook this year. I should finish by January. And then once I'm done with that, I won't be writing books anymore. We'll delegate that to staff who support course content and things like that. But for someone with not a business background, I've been forced just by the constraints of my environment to run very efficiently in that. I'm not stuck on Zoom calls all day. I can't be. My job is to be out there. My job is to be on the gym floor with pro athletes. My job is to be in airplanes, and my job is to be in front of a computer. So like very lucky in that sense to have fallen, because if I hadn't have fallen into that, if we had an office, if we had a headquarters, I don't know if I'd have adopted the same structure. But this is purely born on a necessity of just building the company on the road.
I had a conversation with someone the other week. She owns a clothing label.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I'm a fan. Well, listen, subscribe.
Right. But it's like she didn't know how inefficient she was until she had a daughter. Right. And it's like, but I feel like what you're saying is you call it luck. I say, nah, like it's not luck. Like it's easy to look back in hindsight and call it luck. But like, I think the idea of like, and kind of the point I'm trying to make is as a mother, like, she's a mother now, like she has to be efficient. And I feel like that's a lot of, that can be the devil, right? For most people, is like, it's putting yourself in situations where you have to be efficient. And, naturally as a company grows, you have to become more efficient with what you do. So I feel like it's like, there's a lesson in that of like, no, like you chose to travel, like, and right. You knew that it was, like, the idea of like you were doing things that not many people in the world would actually be willing to do, right? And the byproduct of that was efficiency. Right. So I think it's the same thing with like, again, like coming back to that story about being a mother. And I've, to be honest, I've actually had that conversation with like 3 mothers, and they've all said the same thing. And I think there's a lesson in that for people and for business owners.
But I think it's difficult for people who don't have something that compels them to sharpen that spear to do it, right? Like, comfort breeds complacency. And, nothing about developing this business over the last 7 years has been comfortable. But it's the reason that the business has developed for 7 years. So, I think that's sort of like when people sit and pick my brain, like I only have one way of going about it. I don't have an MBA or whatever. So like my advice, especially in the fitness space, is like, you want to find out if you love it enough to get through it, go ahead, like pack up all your shit. I mean, I was kind of forced to do it. I didn't really have a choice. And I was like, all right, I'm going to set out to do a few months of seminars, and I'll go move back to Windsor, Ontario with my tail tucked between my legs, and I'll be the most educated lineman worker on an assembly line that anyone's ever known. And I'll just fucking build Chrysler Town and Countries, I think is what my hometown's known for. You know, maybe I'll sell some Coke on the weekends, and that'll be it. And then that was 5 years ago. And I haven't been home since. So it's like that was forced on me, whether, you know, in part to my own decisions or it was a conscious choice. But people just aren't willing to do that. And fuck, why would you? Why would you do that? I fucking sent my shit back to my parents and was like, I'm going to Lebanon, New York, Tampa Bay, Miami, and Australia for a month. I might see you after that. And that was 5 years ago. And it's like, if I had any other option, I probably would have taken it. And a lot of people do have other options, that they convince themselves to take other options. So they don't end up in a position where that's a necessity. It's like, it was literally nothing other than survival. Like, I had no money. Like, I was scraping enough cash to like go. Sometimes I'd be stuck in a city and have to put a seminar together enough to make money to get a flight out of that city. So it's like, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but I wouldn't change it for the fucking world.
Yeah, and I think that's the lesson, right? Like, that's the big one. Is like, I think it's about risk taking, right? It's like, as you take more risks, you actually get better, or you start to understand what goes into getting the reward for that risk, and then you can take more risks, and it compounds over time. Like, and like, I always go back to this lesson that I learned off a mentor of mine, and he said, you have to build infrastructure in your business that allows your business to grow into that infrastructure. And it's idea.
Like the way I used to buy t-shirts. Yeah. Like, I'll buy 3X and I'll fill it out one day.
But it's important because it's a risk, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Like, naturally, as a business owner, okay, like, I'm investing in something that I'm not going to see the return on until the future, right? So it's like, okay, if I'm going to invest in people, like, we might not see the return on those people for 2 years. So therefore, in the short term, it's actually, it's probably going to put a little bit of pressure on, you know, naturally, you know, you might look at your books and you plan all this stuff out, right? But it's like, the business still has to grow into that for that to be an effective decision, right? So I think it kind of comes back to that. Like, that's where my mind goes when I think about what you just said.
Yeah, and again, the tough part with me, and like, I don't want any of this to come off as advice. It's like, this is not legal advice. It didn't have a choice, right? Like, there's no consequence. I'm still a guy in a room that says shit about working out. The rooms are sick and the auditoriums are great and all that stuff. But it's like, I lived in my Toyota 4Runner, the San Francisco International Airport parking lot. And I would just live there until I figured out another seminar. I would literally just be like, look, don't pay me. Just put me up in a hotel so I could fucking shower. And that was it. So it's like, what are the consequences? Oh no, we were in the red last month. I was overdrafted for like 6 years. It was like, what the red? Ooh, the red. I didn't even know what the red was. Yeah. So it's just like, risk taking for me is there is no risk.
Yeah.
Like, there's no risk.
Yeah.
And I think just being able to impart that on someone is something I honestly, to the point now, I don't even know if it can be taught or if it can be like relayed. Like, if you have to ask, you already know. And that's the tough part, because the people who reach out, and again, like, reach out. Like, I'm not like a mean guy, but like, if you feel compelled to reach out to pick my brain, I've never like reach out to a random person on the internet to pick my brain. Well, I talk to my friends. I talk to people I build relationships with, and I get their advice because they know me. I don't know you from fucking hole in the wall, some random guy in my DM. Because like, I say this because I don't want my story to like learn from my mistakes. Like, this doesn't work unless you're start from a really shitty spot, right? If you have like a wife and dude, it's not gonna work. Like, what's your advice? Get a divorce. Like, you don't want to hear that from some guy in the DM, right? Like, so, and I'm so like reserved in talking about business because it is just like, my knowledge around it is just like relentless. I will do what no one else will do. And I guarantee you that. Like everyone's like, oh my God. It's like, I don't understand how you do that. It's like, okay, then you don't understand where I'll be in 5 years. It's like, and that's fine. Like, and I get it. And sometimes, man, when I'm on, there's like I was in Tunisia a few weeks ago, and it's like you don't get in cabs outside the airport in North Africa, especially when you look like I look. And I was like walking 3 hours to my hotel with my luggage in Tunisia, in fucking North Africa. I'm like, man, it'd be nice if my work day ended at 5 o'clock. Like, it'd be nice to like wake up to an alarm and have like a golden retriever in a yard. Meanwhile, I'm fucking 110 degrees outside pushing a suitcase down the side of a highway. I try not to get kidnapped. I was like, fuck, that's a risk. But it's no question. Oh shit, the cabs are crazy here. The bus that was supposed to get me is not there. All right, just go. Just keep your feet moving. And it's like, it is so hard to impart that on someone. And I don't know if I want to think it can be taught, because I want people to be able to experience like what being able to run through walls feels like. And it's just a hard thing to get through. I don't even know if I can articulate it properly enough for people to want to take those risks.
It's kind of like just start and don't stop, right? It's like, that's the advice.
Yeah, it's
start, don't stop, no matter what.
Yeah, I literally remember, I talk like my business partner, Jordan Junta, like we were going to release our first product. The podcast had been running for 6 months. We were getting at least enough tags on Instagram. We're like, okay, someone might buy it. And we were messing around in the back. I was wearing my Shopify store hat or whatever the hell I was pretending to know about back then. And he just like, can we just hurry up and just make these mistakes, please? And he just put the website live, and then like the first couple sales like didn't work because Stripe wasn't integrated.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's the kind of operator I need. Like, just kick ass and take names later. So it was the risk thing is something I think about a lot, because now in a point where there is risk, there are higher stakes, and we're looking at this head, the heart, and the gut, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what is our metrics? What is our data going to tell us to support, the vision of the brand? The decisions still happen quick because our ability to assess risk is so well trained.
That's a good way to put it. Your ability to assess risk over time, from making mistakes and understanding.
Well, that has to scale because the consequences will scale.
Yeah,
but relatively, if your ability to assess risk improves with the magnitude of the consequences, it's still a wash.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. I don't think of anything with, no matter the number of commas in the thing, it's all the same, because I've gone through every step of the way, and I've always been a step ahead in my ability to just lean into risk.
All right, we're going to jump in. We're going to finish up, and we're going to dive into quick fire. So, sounds bad.
Well, dude, I'm synonymous for being long answers to short questions.
Yeah. No. So, like, I always have to preface this as well, because, like, I had my stepfather on, Kevin, and like he said like 5 words because he just doesn't get it. He's like, what are we doing right now? What's a podcast? You know what I mean? Like, and he said like 5 words. You can say what you want. These are just kind of like a core group of questions. I'm only going to ask 2 though.
Because he knows 5 will be too long.
Yeah. So one piece of advice for your younger self.
Nothing. Wouldn't change anything. Because I think that's something that if people are in a position, not to say this is me, in a position where you might want to learn from something they have to say, then everything they did to get to that position was useful, whether good or bad. There's no such thing as a negative side effect. It's all just effect. I wouldn't change anything. Nothing. Just give them a wave. Be all right.
I knew that was going to be your answer. I knew it. That's why I wanted to ask it. Okay, so what's the most important trait that a founder must have for success?
See, I feel like I have a real complex with not being a business guy and running a business, right? I feel like a fat personal trainer, because it's just like, the only way I'm going to frame this in a way where I feel confident answering it, because the way words, they mean something, the way they were organized. So my brain is be okay answering the question is, what do you think my most important trait in being a founder is? And it's just relentless. You have to be just fucking relentless. Like, do everything and anything. Like, no is not an answer. Like, at whatever it takes, whenever it takes, wherever it takes you. Like, it's just, I don't know how to, like, I feel like I want to reach through if someone's listening to this and starting a business and just grab people by the fucking shirt collar and be like, figure it the fuck out. you just figure it out. You didn't just, and then on to the next, and you just figure it out. So I think for me, if I had to attribute something to where we are now, that's a part of my personality or whatever. It would just be just absolutely fucking relentless.
It's the truth. You know, you gain some experience, but it's the same thing over and over again. It's like, there's a problem, fuck, we've got to solve it, and sometimes we get to solve it with more people.
So
it's like literally it. Mate, I want to say a massive thank you. Fuck, like, again, like, the first podcast I ever did on this channel was with you. You pushed me into this field, and mate, it's just good to see you again.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Donnie, thanks for putting this together. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next week.